people, the private sector, the media, and the entire UN system to join hands in addressing the global issue of violence against women and girls. As all of you know, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has posed serious challenges and has noted a spike in the reports of domestic violence. And thus, this has prompted the United Nations to declare 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. That is from 25th November to 10th December 2020, under this year's global theme, Orange the World, Fund, Respond, Prevent, and Collect. Today, through this activity, we mark the concluding day of this campaign to end gender-based violence. Friends, today also happens to be the World Human Rights Day, and what an apt day to get together to advocate for an end to gender-based violence. I would just be inviting my friend Khushbu Saha from the Be the Change group. But before that, I would just like to share some data about the Indian statistics on gender-based violence. Well, there are harsh truths from India as well. The National Family Health Survey 4 suggested that 30% of women in India in the age group of 15 to 49 have experienced physical violence since the age of 15. And that's a very tender age. About 31% of married women have experienced physical, sexual, or emotional violence by their spouses. These numbers are, however, from 2015-16, and recent data from India is still underreported. And that is what makes it even more important for us to discuss today on this platform the issue of gender-based violence. So without wasting much time, I call upon my friend, Ms. Khushbu Saha, founder member of Be the Change Young Professional Group of NQCN, to do the introductions to the panelists and take the proceedings of the evening forward. Khushbu, the screen is all yours.
Thank you, sir. Very good evening to all the participants as well as the panelists. These are the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, which is an international campaign that takes place every year. It commences on 25th of November, that is the International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women, till 10th of December, that's Human Rights Day, indicating that violence against women is the most pervasive breach of human rights worldwide. As the world is retained inside the house due to the lockdown measures introduced to curb the COVID-19 pandemic, reports from around the world showed that an alarming increase is already existing in the violence against women. Gender-based violence can be physical or psychological and can be immediate as well as long-term. Health system is often the first point of contact for survivors of violence. Besides, survivors come in contact with health facilities and providers at some point in their life. So, being the upcoming health professionals, the nursing and the medical students assume an important role in addressing the health consequences of violence through provision of treatment and care, and performing medico-legal role as well in the prevention of violence. Hence, it is very important that we are aware of such an imminent social issue as well as raise awareness about it in the society. With the support of NQCN, Nationwide Quality of Control Network, along with collaboration with SAMA, which is a Women Health and Resource Group, I, Khushbu Saha, intern at Lady Hardinge Medical College and a student leader at Be the Change, which is a medical and nursing undergraduate quality improvement initiative. I'm delighted to welcome all of you for this panel discussion. I would like to introduce an esteemed panel of speakers who would be joining us tonight for the discussion. We have on board Dr. Anil Gurtu, Professor of Medicine at Lady Hardinge Medical College. He has a special interest in medical ethics and law, as well as medical education. Dr. Harish Pembre, he is Director Professor at Department of Pediatrics in Kalavati Saran Children's Hospital. He is also the head of WHO Collaborating Center for Training and Research in Adolescent Health and in charge of the Adolescent Health in Kalavati Hospital. He is also the chairperson of Indian Association of Pediatrics Research in Children Health Groups. We have on board with us Dr. Manju Puri. Ma'am is Director Professor and Head of Department of Obs and Gynae at Lady Hardinge Medical College, New Delhi. She is presently the chairperson of Quality of Improvement Committee of AOGD. She's a member of the National Mentoring Group for Medical Colleges for the Lakshya Implementation Program. She has been awarded multiple national awards for the work in her field. We have Dr. Prerna Kukreti, Associate Professor and in charge of Women Health Clinic in Lady Hardinge Medical College, Delhi. Her major scientific field of interest are human rights of persons with mental illness, forensic psychiatry, women mental health, community psychiatry, and neuropsychiatry. She's also author of the book Forensic Psychiatry, An Indian Perspective. With over more than 50 publications, MAM organizes regular workshops for general physicians and psychiatrists regarding clinical and legal issues concerning case of sexual assault. We also have on board with us Advocate Shalini Agarwal. She is a law graduate and master's in IT management, a partner in MSc Legal, which is a full-service business advisory law firm having presence in all over India. MAM advises in prevention of sexual harassment and matrimonial-related matters. She generally takes pro bono work for the betterment of the society and upliftment of the poor section, and particularly women and children. Joining us is also Ms. Atsa, a member of SAMA, which is a Delhi-based organization working as a resource group for women and health, engaging on varied issues of public health and gender rights and justice as a part of looking into the areas of gender-based violence and strengthening health system response to gender-based violence. We also have on board Ms. Shavi Sharma. She's also the co-founder of Be the Change group at Lady Hardinge Medical College. A very warm welcome to all our panelists, and thank you so much, sir and ma'am, for joining us tonight. And a very warm welcome to all our participants. I invite you all to take part in this discussion by posting your queries and doubts during the discussion. The panel will be open to discussions of questions at the end of the panel discussion. Thank you. And with that, I'd like to proceed with the panel discussion. First of all, the panel would be staged in a Q&A session. The first question is on what constitutes gender-based violence and the epidemiology of gender-based violence in today's time. We have Ms. Atsa answering this question. Over to you, Ms. Atsa.
Thank you, Khushbu. I've just put together a couple of slides, as I said before, and I hope that it is visible.
Ma'am, you can put on your video also as well.
Oh, okay. Yes, let me try that. Yes. Yes, hello. Sorry, some network problem. So thank you, Khushbu, and thank you, Dr. Vikram, and to the organizing team. To answer to the question that you have posed at the beginning of this panel, I just have put together a few slides, and I hope that everyone is able to see this. Khushbu, if you can just confirm that this is visible.
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay. So I just want to begin by saying big congratulations to the organizing team, and as both the prior speakers before me said that today it's so amazing that we are having this conversation today on 10th December, which is also the International Day of Human Rights and culminates the 16 days of activism every year, and that we are basically really joining voices not just in our country, in our cities, but also globally. We are part of a global conversation happening right now in this moment across the world, which is about how to eliminate gender-based violence and how to come together to raise our voice and to break the silence about GBV. Now, to the question of what constitutes gender-based violence and what is the epidemiology of it, I see gender-based violence is a form of violence that is directed at a person on the basis of their gender, which means that this is different from other kind of violence because GBV is being done, whether it is domestic violence or sexual violence. There are different forms of GBV, but because that person is a woman, or because that person is a girl, or because that person is a child. These are situations of these are social identities, or that create situations of vulnerability, that may create situations of marginalization. Certain marginalized communities, or a trans person, there are various gender identities also. So because this violence happens using that vulnerability, by exploiting that social vulnerability, and that is why it is called gender based violence, and not, and this needs to be understood differently from any other forms of violence. As statistics go, Dr. Vikram already shared it in the beginning, and I have the similar statistics on my slide as well. But just to say that what we are seeing at the India level, globally also we see the same statistics. Just to remember it simply, it helps to remember that 1 in 3 women or girls face gender-based violence in their lifetime. This is a globally phenomena. These are also the figures that we see in our country, in various regions at different states. Now, it is also important to remember, because as you raise the question of epidemiology, and because we are seeing it as an incidence, and we are seeing that why it is important to discuss it as a public health issue, it's because of the fact that it's so much prevalent. And also, one word of caution with these statistics is that also that GBV is often underreported, and we will come to that, and how that plays out, the what it means for health system response. We'll see it in the next slide. So why it is a public health issue? So the numbers are 1 in 3 women or 1 in 3 girls. Now, if that is the number for any other thing impacting health of the people, imagine the magnitude of the problem. Now, while we are discussing epidemiology of it, it is important to remember that there are documented health-related signs and consequences of GBV, and it can have range of health impacts, both in short-term or long-term basis. But at the same time, GBV is not a disease. So it's not a set criteria or set impact. Different incidents of violence, so like for instance, domestic violence can involve physical beating. It also involves verbal abuse. So depending on the form of violence, depending on the person, on the survivors, whom we call survivor, it really varies. So unlike other diseases, where we can in our health diagnosis or prognosis, we can directly look for those tests. This is not the case when it comes to GBV. But certainly, because of the research done so far, there are range of health impacts that have been documented, ranging from physical, reproductive health impacts, sexual health outcomes, and these are all negative health impacts, and also psychological. So whether it is feeling of intense powerlessness, denial, and ranging to extreme impacts such as suicide or death, because often these violence may also, if they result in death of the person, then, or when we are saying reproductive, so pregnancy related complications or maternal mortality again, or just any physical impacts such as broken teeth, loss of hearing, vision, and these are just some of the range of impacts that are mentioned on this slide. Important thing here is to remember that because the violence is underreported, what perhaps happens and what could be happening is that a lot of times survivors report to healthcare providers with these signs, with these health symptoms, with these health situation, uh, whether or not they are disclosing, or depending, that whether or not they have space to tell that they are facing violence. So many number of times healthcare providers and doctors treat survivors, they provide care to survivors without the knowledge because somewhere either we are not asking that question, or we, that kind of system is not there. But still, as what Khushbu said in the beginning, that healthcare providers often are the first point of contact for first aid, as a safe contact, and often survivors are reporting to hospitals, even in situations where they are not telling that these health impacts are because of the violence. Yeah. Now, in terms of policy level, just to be aware that increasingly this issue globally has been recognized, at the UN level, at the WHO level, which is also a UN body, and it has been recognized that we need to identify, recognize GBV as a public health issue. So in May 2014 was the UN resolution, and since then there have been various policy documents, and which means that every country, and including India, that health systems have to make those systems, have to develop those guidelines, and healthcare providers have to be trained, their capacities have to be built, so that this issue can also be addressed. Now, following these developments in India also, we have got some very comprehensive and good guidelines, which some of you may have already been aware about and you are following. But to the medical students who are joining today, maybe you will be reading about them in future, and these will come handy. So the orange book that you're seeing is the MOHFW guidelines and protocols for survivors of sexual violence. Then the previous one that you saw, that is on POXO for survivors of children survivors, and in which there's one dedicated chapter for medical and health professionals. So what these guidelines tell us also, that there is increasing recognition of the role of health system, and when we are saying health system, healthcare providers, and certainly when we say that they have a role to play, we have a role to play, then what is that role? There needs to be that discussion, there needs to be that enabling of that role, and these guidelines do that. And why health system? And as Khushbu already pointed, we have discussed that these are often the safer and first point of contact. Healthcare providers can recognize violence, they can minimize the impact of violence. So not just after the violence, not just treating the injuries, but also by linking them with other agencies, by telling them that they have an option. There is an immense potential, and also in terms of data collection, by identifying violence, it can also play that role of GBV in a given area. And most important, that there is a dual role to play, which is one is of medico legal, that is widely known, and some of you who are residents may be practicing it, and will perhaps be doing. But at the same time, the primary role as a caregiver, which is therapeutic role, is also very important, and so there is this dual role that needs to be remembered. And one more question that Khushbu and the organizing team had asked me about sharing success stories. I know previously also I've been, joined this team, and I've shared case studies. But today I just want to say that so many success stories come to my mind, because GBV is a very complex issue. One is to like, we do not respond to GBV only when survivor comes to us. That's one aspect. But GBV as an issue, even this conversation, this panel is a success story, because it is creating spaces. It is breaking the silence. So even this panel in itself needs to be seen as a success story. Of course, on field, I can think of so many success stories to tell you that by when we become aware, when we take responsibility to support survivors in our own capacity as doctors or as community leaders, survivors are able to come out of violence. I can share with you one example of this doctor that I remember, who was asked in court. This gynecologist doctor, she had filled in the medico legal, and she had to be produced before the court to give her testimony. And the judge asked her, and this is after 2014, after the Nirbhaya case, when the laws were changed and everything. And the judge asked her, and this doctor was part of her training program, and the judge had asked her, ki, why have you not done two-finger test? And because that was part of the pro forma, and this was an old pro forma. And the doctor explained to the court, to that judge, and this is at not at a district court, not in Delhi, of other state. So the doctor explained to the judge that how to finger test is, it's a bias test, and now law has also has deemed it illegal and it's unscientific. And so she explained why she hasn't done that, and that there are newer protocols to be followed. And this helped in really enabled that survivor in that case to access justice. This other case that I remember is of a doctor, and this is from Delhi. I remember she was presented with a survivor, who was living in a shelter home, and this is a minor survivor, an adolescent girl, and she was very distraught. And she was produced by Child Welfare Committee, and she was few weeks pregnant following the sexual assault that she had faced. But this doctor then reached out to organization and linked that survivor to other counselors, and that really helped that survivor, and this was 15-year-old girl, that really helped that girl. And this example is from Delhi, to become calm, to be able to take her decision, because then they were doing the process of doing her medical examination, and explaining to her if she wants the MTP or not. And there that doctor played that very successful role of of taking care and of linking her to counselors. And of course, this was made possible, and this is the last point I just want to make, that it is a multi-sectoral response, because GBV is a complex issue. Health system alone cannot do everything. They also need support. They need linkages and support of other institutions. And we can, by coming together, I hope, and we have been trying, to create these interlinkages. At Sama, we really advocate for strengthening these interlinkages, so that hospitals also have a list of counselors, they have a list of shelter homes, they have list of government agencies, their contact numbers, when as the need be, on case by case basis, hospitals or the examining doctors can reach out to these to also make these necessary linkages, along with playing their own role. So I will just stop here. I'll be happy to take any questions in the question answer chat, and answer them. I hope I answered your question, Khushbu. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Khushbu. I would just like to welcome two very eminent guests here with us today. We have Professor Manju Puri, Professor and Head Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at Lady Hardinge Medical College. Ma'am has joined. Welcome, ma'am. And we have Dr. Dinesh Baswal. Dr. Dinesh Baswal has been the Joint Commissioner Maternal Health in charge at Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India. And sir has been looking after the Labor Room Quality Improvement Initiative, or the Lakshya program, and numerous maternal health programs for Government of India, and has been single-handedly spearheading the revolution in the maternal health and reduction of maternal health statistics in the country. Thank you so much, Baswal sir. We are indeed very privileged to have you on the panel. Thank you. You can proceed, ma'am. You are mute, Khushbu.
Thank you, sir. And a very warm welcome to Dr. Manju Puri and Dr. Baswal. Considering the gravity of the situation and how Ms. Atsa explained to us what is gender-based violence, now we would like to understand what is the rise of gender-based violence cases during this pandemic time and the reasons behind it. And I would request Dr. Prerna, ma'am, to discuss the following question. A request to all the panelists to keep the discussion short, as we have a limited time for the panel discussion. Ma'am, you may proceed with the discussion.
Can we request Dr. Prerna to please put on a video, please? And put the slides on the slideshow mode, please. We can't hear Prerna. Khushbu, is she muted?
Um,
No, she's not muted. Prerna, can you hear us? We can't hear Prerna. Okay, I think we can move to the next question, and meanwhile we can you can just text Prerna later on. We will just move to the next question, please. Yeah.
So moving on to the next question, we have, now that we have victims of gender-based violence approaching us as healthcare professionals, how to approach or suspect a victim of violence, and the signs and symptoms and the points to be noted in history while examining such a patient. So we would have Dr. Manjupuri to guide us with the following point in how to suspect a victim of violence, especially in case of adult women.
Yeah, thank you, Khushbu, for this question. I think it is very, very valid that first and foremost is that we should actually be sensitized to this problem, and at the same time have a very high index of suspicion. So basically, when we look at our general practice, we know that most of these people, may not come out with any violence, except those who are actually having, sexual assault. So those who are very brave ones would come, or who actually need any medical assistance would come. And sometimes, they would come on their own. We have a one-stop center where, they can come in, and the patient is not supposed to move from one place to another. The patient stays put there, and whatever references we want, those references would be, the people would be called there. So that is what is functioning in Lady Hardinge also. So we would go there, and then we have to, there are three ways the patient can come. One is the patient would come on her own without police. The second could be she had already gone to the police and she comes to us. And the third is that, you find it out, that the patient has got a problem. So any of these conditions, we need to know that we need to take a history from the patient, document the details properly, and then we have to take consent for examination and consent for collecting the samples, and and consent for treatment. So whatever the patient gives, whatever consent she gives, if she says she doesn't want to have sampling done, then you can't force the sampling on her. So whatever she says, we have to abide by what it is, but we need to explain her that how is the sampling going to help her. So we have to be very, very empathetic, and we have to be very, we should make sure that she has privacy, you maintain confidentiality, you have a connect with her. And if she is accompanied by police, you make sure that there's no one around her when you are examining. So these are small, small things which we need to remember. And sometimes people would think, in case there's no lady doctor, she cannot be examined. No, everyone is bound to examine, and we can't postpone the examination. And there are few important things which you need to know, that, if she comes within 4 days, then the sampling, you can offer her sampling. If she comes after 4 days, then the sampling does not have any value. So all these things have to be kept in mind. And this is those who actually come to you with sexual assault. But, you have lots of patients coming in the antenatal clinic. If they keep coming with non-specific symptoms, say pain abdomen or pain here, pain there, and repeated visits to the hospital, do think that there is some problem at their end. And likewise in gynae OPD, they will come with lower pain, lower abdomen. So basically, they really don't have any way of, kind of expressing their distress. So a lot of them might be depressed, and would have somatization of symptoms. So any patient who you don't find any findings, and we say, nahi, sab kuch theek hai, you go home, and they come back again. So they keep shuttling from one OPD to the another OPD. So that is why I said that in obs and gynae, one should think beyond obstetrics and gynecological problems when a patient does not have any symptoms. So don't just pass on her to go to ortho, go to medicine, go to surgery. You need to coordinate. So that is what is most important. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So, thank you, ma'am, for sharing us with that. Keeping that in mind, we also have a section of population that is the minors and the children and adolescent girls who approach the healthcare professionals. And I would like to request Dr. Harish Pembre to join the discussion and tell us how to approach such victims of violence.
Thanks for organizing this wonderful program. Am I audible clearly?
Yes, sir.
Because several medical students are also there, I would like to insist on that children may not speak about it. Even when they are suffering, they will not speak. And you can ask them why they don't speak. Because the way children think, the way of thinking is much different than what the adult thinks. They think in concrete manner or existential manner. So whatever is told to them, whatever is done with them by some adult figure, which is father-like figure or mother-like figure, they instantly believe that person. Yes, whatever is being done by this person is correct. Whatever is told by this person is correct. So they suffer in silence for very long time also. Okay, this is one thing. Second, they can also believe the perpetrator when they threat the child that I will do this thing to your mother or father or brother or sister, I will take them, I will kill them. So they believe that this person can really do those things. So for the love of their near ones, they will not talk to you. Okay. So it is very difficult to find out whether some violence is being done to the child or not. Okay. This is very important because national study has shown that every child, not every, but every second child suffers from this kind of sexual violence at least once in the lifetime, both boys and girls. Boys also suffer. This is also very important to say. Okay. So this is one thing we must do that they will not talk right this. But do they never talk about it? They always talk about it. Okay. It is us, we need to understand how they are talking, what they are talking. We need to understand their language. Okay. So they come with very different issues, with very different problems. So as a physician, as a doctor, or as an adult who has some kind of protection to the child, we need to learn those things. Okay. So again, Dr. Puri has said high index of suspicion, which should always be there. Okay. Any presenting complaint which is very difficult to explain organically. When I say this, means if headache is there, you did every kind of test, everything is normal, but headache is persistent. Pain abdomen, you don't find anything abnormality anywhere, ultrasound and all kinds of tests are normal, still that pain is persistent. Okay. Any unexplained injuries. I remember one case, a small child about 4-5 years came to us when I was a senior resident in AIMS. The child had sharp wounds on abdomen in various stages, healed wound, healing wound, fresh wounds. They all were bleeding. Any sharp about 1 inch length, sharp wounds. You can't find in any disease such sharp wounds. Okay. When we express that this may be some deliberate injury by someone, then family got suspicion and they took away the child. This is just one example that someone can harm. It was a male child, some rivalry, something may happen in the family or in the neighborhood. So such harms can occur. This is definitely a violence. Another is a sexual violence. Of course, it should never happen, but it should not at all happen second time. I remember a case. A small girl came to casualty with kind of dysentery. Okay, it was a fresh blood. When I tried examining, there was some injuries in the private parts. Gynae referral came and all those things happened. Surgery was done and child improved after that. When I asked mother, can someone do it? Mother said, we don't have anyone else at home. Me, my husband, and this child is there. So I still remember I asked her that whether the father can do it. She categorically denied, no, it is not possible. Father cannot. Okay, I forgot that case. After about 6 months or so, I found that lady with a child again roaming around in the ward. So I asked her, what happened? She said that, doctor, you were correct. It was the father who did it last time, and again he did it. But out of guilt, father committed suicide. So probably we did not take care of the perpetrator for the first time. Probably he was suffering some kind of OCD or some mental illness. So he could not stop himself and did it again. And out of guilt, whatever the mental illness was there, and committed suicide. So these are small things, but we have to remember those things. So any change in behavior, recent change in behavior which you can't explain, do ask about it. Okay. Any awkward behavior. A small child who is not exposed to sexuality can behave like sexual acts or so. We must always ask what is happening. Even showing pornographic films or showing those kinds of pictures is also a kind of a violence which children suffer. Any unexpected injury which I have said. And definitely when they come with the obvious injuries, we have to always suspect what violence child might have suffered. Okay. So these are the few things where we should always suspect and ask about it. We all should learn about it. It is not at all difficult asking those 2-3 questions. But as the next question is also there with Dr. Gurtu, that it is very, very important to give an enabling environment to the child or to any survivor or any victim of the violence. Unless the enabling environment is there where the possible perpetrators are not around and the person have faith, if I talk to this person, the person is going to help me, whether this may be a doctor or a policeman or a counselor or a social worker. Okay, so you have to give this environment, establish rapport, then ask these questions, then only it is going to help. These questions are very, very simple. Just ask whether anyone is harassing you, anyone is आपको कोई परेशान तो नहीं करता, आपको कोई जबरदस्ती कोई काम तो नहीं करवाता. Simple question. And by the body language, by the answer, you can find out. So if you suspect, then you can go in detailed history. And in most of the cases, these things are very, very possible. And when you find yourself not competent enough to ask these questions, take help, refer that patient to someone who can do it, some counselor, some staff nurse, some doctor. You can definitely find some such persons in your environment, in your hospital. If you are running a clinic in some other clinic somewhere, do not leave that patient like this. Always try to find out. And there may be some legal issues also about documenting it or not documenting it. But if you are working in the best interest of the child, and if you are documenting it maybe in your own notes, that also will save you from all the legal hassles. If you are truly working for the best interest of the child. Okay? We may not be following all the rules and regulations exactly as per the statute, but still, if you document, if you prove this thing, you work in the best interest of the child, nothing is going to happen to you. Okay? High index of suspicion is very, very important thing. And all those, anything which can't be explained by your pathology or by your clinical medicine or any test, do suspect some kind of violence, harassment, and something. And certainly, I have not talked about the mental harassment or mental violence, which Dr. Prerna would like to talk. So I will be happy to answer any questions regarding this later on. That's
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir. Now moving forward, Dr. Prerna has joined us again for the discussion. We would go back to the question, which was regarding the rise of gender-based violence during the COVID-19 pandemic and the reasons behind it. Ma'am, I would like you to, I would request you to kindly answer the following question.
Right. Thank you, Khushbu. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Right. There is some network issue at my end, so possibly I'm not able to display the PowerPoint. I'll just answer the question, right? Yes, as all the earlier speakers have told that this problem has been there since a long time, and this day we are commemorating itself is a sign that a lot of work and awareness is happening. But almost 2020 has gone almost amalgamated into the concerns related to COVID, and the realization didn't happen that another silent pandemic in form of gender-based violence was also creeping beneath it. What happened was that most of these things were not exactly related to the illness per se, but they were related to the confinement that happened because of illness. Government said that stay home, stay safe. But if we looked up at the initial data that had emerged from the pandemic, especially during the lockdown one phase, then be it the data from the India that talked about the National Commission of Women, they documented that they had received a tremendous amount of calls during the span of March 23rd to April 16. These were almost 33% calls were higher as compared to the last year. And the data that the UN did a study across Singapore, Cyprus, and France and Argentina, there also in the other countries also the picture was almost similar. Almost 25 to 33% cases had risen up. And this was ubiquitous. It was not the thing that it was happening in the houses where people were confined and the living conditions were not good. It was found that almost uh, people with higher education, professional degree, and graduate were the people who were amounting for nearly 60% of the victims. And people from surprisingly were from the red zone were higher, almost amounting for the 48% of the people who were reporting for these issues. The reasons that were found that why are these things being reported more or are happening more nowadays was that this pandemic and confinement led to loss of the social protective fabric. Many of the women were facing the crunch of economic security. Many of the women who were involved in the informal sector had experienced the loss of job, leading to financial dependence on the husband or the other person where they were living up in the abusive relationship. More time was being spent at home, either due to loss of job or some work from home related thing, where also they were more forced to do more work because of the skewed gender role expectancy that is prevalent in our society, leading to further discords. Whatever was their support system to come forward for help in form of family, neighbors, coming and visiting hospitals or reaching out to NGOs was restricted because of restrictions on travel or not being able to go out because of concern of catching the infection. Even government did a good number of creative initiatives in form of opening up the helplines. NCW also came up with the open WhatsApp number available. But being confined at home, privacy was not there adequately for people to report their problems. And also what happened that the perpetrator or the people who were already in the abusive relationship and the power dynamics somehow got tilted in favor of them. They were more in position to hold back the financial support, discourage the women from going out seeking help or going for health seeking behavior. And also in men, the COVID pandemic witnessed something called rise in substance use related behavior. It is often seen that any economic uncertainty or any poverty or stress that leads in certain sect of people for poor coping strategies, which can manifest either in form of aggression, which can be resulting in increased incidences of gender-based violence, or it can lead to increased substance use, which further can lead on to gender-based violence. And also, as earlier speaker said, that healthcare system was one of the first place where people were coming for help. Now, because of concern of catching COVID, people were not coming to hospitals. And also, when they were coming, the infrastructure nowadays in OPDs is placed this way that distance is lot between the service provider and the patient, and there is a mask. So, being able to hear and being able to convey those sensitive issues, so that right kind of atmosphere to convey those issues were not there. And also there was some focus more on assessing the emergency care, and not much concern was given to these gender sensitive issues. So that also led to not many of these cases being reported at healthcare system level. And also, UNCRPD recently did a survey where they reported that almost 43 million women reported loss of access to contraceptive measures. That was like deprivation of sexual reproductive right of a woman, which led to them being forced for coercion for pregnancy and inability to access the family planning procedures also. So these were the things that led to a dismal picture that these cases increased and help could not be accessed by the victims. Over to you, Khushbu.
Thank you, ma'am. Now that we are aware of the reasons behind the rise of gender-based violence during this pandemic, uh, I would like to inform everybody that Dr. Anil Gurtu could not join us for the panel discussion. So the question would be taken by Dr. Prerna. Yes, sir.
The doctor told me that I can also take some of the questions on especially privacy confidentiality.
So we cannot hear you properly.
Harish, we cannot hear you. Could you be a bit louder?
Good question. No. Wait.
Yes, sir.
Harish, you can take Dr. Guttu's question.
Can I just come in and ask a question from Dr. Prerna in case you allow?
Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Prerna, I was wondering as to how do you think people who were already alcoholic and substance abusers, do you think that lack of availability of alcohol and other stuff would have led on to irritability, and that could have also led to an increase in violence?
Right. Remember, there were three issues about substance use in the way that they lead on to violence. One is that, yes, this is the negative emotional state in which they are using substance. So possibly they had some underlying mental illness and resorting to, instead of doing some right coping thing, they are using substance, and under the effect of that, they are doing violence. One is that during the initial part, that was only during the lockdown one, when the access to alcohol was not available. So that time substance related withdrawal did lead to agitation. We have data from our own hospital where in a single day we witnessed almost 5 to 7 cases of delirium tremens. So, but that thing led only during till the lockdown one lasted. But yes, that also could have led to it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Moving on to the next question. Now we need to know as to how to build a rapport with the victim of violence and the ethical considerations that surround in approaching a victim of violence and the role of privacy and confidentiality. I would request Dr. Harish Pembre to answer the following question.
Thanks, Khushbu. Dr. Guttu is busy in some other important work, so he could not join. Actually, this privacy and confidentiality is very, very important, and I would say in all clinical scenarios, whether this is a simple OPD or your ward or everywhere. But this becomes very, very important or rather critical in cases of when we are dealing with anyone who has suffered from some kind of violence or some harassment, something like that. Okay. And we want that the victim should speak truth, should narrate what has happened to her or him. That time, the privacy and confidentiality is very, very important. Now question comes how to practice it, how to provide privacy and confidentiality. Okay. One by one. Privacy is audio privacy and video privacy or visual privacy. So you have to be at a place which gives some confidence of protection and safety to the child or the victim, as well as that when person is talking to the victim or to the patient, no one should be able to see and listen the conversation. So this is the privacy. You have to provide it. There should be a separate room or separate place where the patient is sure that no one is listening, no one is watching. Okay, so this is very, very important about the privacy. Then confidentiality. This comes little later. You have to make some special efforts for that. What we practice in the adolescent clinic, there is a written poster kind of thing which is written there in Hindi. खुलकर करें मन की बात, गुप्त रखी जाएगी आपकी बात. Then whenever we talk to children, adolescent children, and then we say this confidentiality is the policy of this clinic. It is written there on the wall. Okay. So when you have a written policy, you instantly create a faith that yes, it is the policy here, and it is most likely to be kept confidential. Okay, so this confidentiality is very, very important. This is our moral, ethical, legal duty of doctors to keep confidentiality. Okay, but there are certain riders to this confidentiality clause, that where we need to break this confidentiality. Okay, and that should be told to our patient very clearly. This victim of sexual violence or other violence is a little different thing. But otherwise, in other patients also, we tell them that yes, we keep everything confidential. But any time when we find something which can harm you, or something where you can harm others, then we may have to break this confidentiality. With your permission, we will have to talk to your parents or guardians, or any other important persons. And in almost always all the patients, they agree to this clause. Okay, but here, when a person who has suffered violence, and maybe he has come for that, then you will have to tell them this confidentiality cannot be absolute, because you will have to involve others also in that. And whenever violence has been there, you have to involve legal agencies in that. We shall learn from the advocate friend who is there, that what legality are involved and how to involve all those legal agencies. So confidentiality can't be closed, can't be capped. Okay, but that is in the welfare of the patient. So you have to instill this confidence and instill this thing that whatever is happening, whatever we are doing, it is in the best interest of the patient, best interest of the person who has suffered or who is suffering. Okay, and in those things they readily agree to it. Yes, you can break the confidentiality because I am suffering and I need to end that thing. Okay, this will take some time of explaining and putting things together, and maybe your body language, your words, the environment around you, everything should be enabling, everything should be saying the same thing, that yes, we respect that person. The harm which has occurred to the person is not because of any mistake of that person. So we have to tell them very, very clearly. We have to remove the guilt part of this harassment, and then you have to instill confidence that you are going to help that person. Then probably this is the way we can practice privacy and confidentiality. And when we are doing these things, we have to build a good rapport with the patient, and that rapport will come when this rapport will come when we talk to the patient. When we begin some neutral questions, we follow heads for the adolescents. So we talk about home, education, etc., and gradually we come to the sensitive questions. So this is the method of rapport building we have to do, and that is how we practice these things. And Dr. Manjupuri can add about the ethical issues while examining the patient and recording the examination finding.
Yeah, basically, when we talk about the ethical part, so it is important that I think you've already taken care of all the points which are important as far as confidentiality and privacy is concerned. Quite often, you have these policemen who are accompanying, or policewomen. They want to be there when they are giving their, so once we found out she had a video, she was wanting to shoot it. So the doctor really needs to know that, no one is supposed to be there. The patient has to be actually, you have to make sure that the patient feels absolutely confident, especially in sexual assault survivors. They're already so traumatized. So you have to be extremely, extremely sensitive. And one should not also keep them waiting. Quite a number of times you are in casualty, so you feel that, okay, we will go because it's going to take long. No, you have to make sure that you are there. And as far as their consent is concerned, so any patient who is less than 12 years, you have to have a consent from the, guardian. But anyone who is above 12 years can give consent. So that is consent and assent, you can call it. So that is between 12 and 18, we would call it assent, and beyond 18, we would call it consent. And then it is very important to be gentle and not be, rough with the patient. So be very gentle, keep assuring her, and make sure that you document things well. And you are aware of what all, you have that proper safe kit now. sexual assault forensic examination kit. So it gives very nice, things have been streamlined. They have been streamlined, much more after the things have gone to the court and the court has given their direction. So it gives you clearly as to what all samples you have to collect. So you systematically have to collect them. It gives you all the instructions. So just follow them one by one. And it is always good to have a female doctor examining, but in case the female doctor is not there, then you can always make sure that a female attendant is there with the consent of the patient. Sometimes when we say that, there could be someone from the family who's conducted, who's done this assault. So that case, the female attendant, also the patient may not want, the survivor may not want the female attendant also to be there. So it's not that, so one has to be very careful about these kind of things. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. I would request all the participants to kindly put their questions forth, as we're going to soon wrap up with the seminar. The next question is to Mrs. Advocate Chandni Agarwal. Ma'am, what are the various gender-based violence laws, related laws, and the legal provision that is there in place to protect the victims, and the various acts that surrounds violence against women and children, like the POCSO Act? So kindly brief us with that.
Shalini ji, you are mute. Unmute yourself.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
Okay.
please.
Okay. Respected Dr. Datta, Dr. Srivastav, and panel members and participants, first of all, many thanks for inviting me for this event, which covers a very important topic, that is gender-based violence. Before taking up your question directly, Khushbu, I would like to give a brief about gender-based violence, right? Gender-based violence is not new in our country. Since long, gender-based violence has been this kind of violence
You have again muted yourself. Please unmute.
I think there is some network issue.
Yeah,
Can you
that's
hear me?
fine. Yeah, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Gender-based violence is not new to our country. Since long time, this kind of violence was witnessed by our society. But with the passage of time, development of society, awareness among women, these things have come in open. And now, since these things have started coming in open, therefore there's a need to introduce some new laws, as well as proper protection should be given to women. And now we are seeing a lot of violence also against children. Therefore, some laws have also been introduced to protect the children as well. India, being a democratic country, provides equal opportunity to, men and women. Time to time, our Supreme Court has delivered number of judgments related to these things, which help to protect the right of all the genders, especially women and children. In 1997, the Honorable Supreme Court, in the matter of Vishakha, it's a very, very important matter, issued guidelines to protect against sexual harassment in offices. Recently, also in 2018, the Honorable Supreme Court declared parts of Section 377 of IPC, that is Indian Penal Code, which pertains to homosexual act, are unconstitutional. This ruling of Supreme Court contributed towards a reduction in discrimination and violence against LGBT, which is basically lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. So now we have, started treating them also with equality. Therefore, it can be said that our government and our court are vigilant about gender-based violence, and from time to time, they have enacted relevant laws and acts. And India's most important legislations related to GBV are: in 1961, we came up with Dowry Prohibition Act. This act starts and states that taking and giving dowry in any form is prohibited and it's a punishable offense. Then in 1986, Indecent Representation of Women Prohibition Act. The act prohibits indecent representation of women in publications, paintings, or through advertisement or any channel. 1986, Child Labor Prohibition and Regulation Act. This act outlines where and how children can work and where they cannot. It is one of the most debated acts regarding children in India. In 1987, Commission of Sati Prevention Act. This act was developed to provide an effective prevention of the commission of sati, that is burning or burying alive of women along with the dead body of her husband. This was a very prevalent thing in India. And in 1990, National Commission for Women Act, an act to constitute a National Commission for Women. The National Commission for Women was set up in 1992 to review the constitutional and legal safeguards for women, recommend remedial legislative measures, facilitate redress of grievance, and advise the government on all policy matters affecting women. And like National Commission for Women, every state has its own Women Commission, where any woman can go freely and lodge a complaint. 1994, the Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques, which is Prohibition of Selection Act. Basically, that is to avoid and prohibit abortion due to girl child in the womb. In 2006, Prohibition of Child Marriage Act, an act to provide for the prohibition of solemnization of child marriage. Under the act, a child is a male who has not completed 21 years of age, and a female who has not completed 18 years of age, contracting, performing, conducting, or directing a child marriage is a punishable offense. 2008 Information and Technology Act. The Information and Technology Act was amended to address exploitation of children through the internet. And now one of the most important act, 2012, the Protection of Children from Sexual Offense Act, that is POSCO, an act to strengthen the legal provisions for the protection of children from sexual harassment, abuse, and exploitation. It applies to all young people under the age of 18 years and provide protection from the offense of sexual assault, sexual harassment, and pornography. In short, it is called POSCO Act. POSCO Act also provides rigorous imprisonment, which may extend up to 2 years or lifetime imprisonment or death penalty in rarest of rare case. The important feature of this act is that there is no provision for bail, because it's such an act that we cannot provide bail to the culprit. So that is why to protect the interest of the victim, it is very important that we should not provide bail to the culprits. And 2013 Criminal Law Amendment Act. The amendment is sought to make provisions relating to gender-based violence. New offenses including acid attacks, sexual harassment, and stalking have been incorporated into the Indian Penal Code. Penalties were more serious for more serious crimes such as gang rape and causing serious injury have been increased. 2013 Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace, Prevention, Prohibition, and Redressal Act. This act provides against sexual harassment of women at workplace, because nowadays we are witnessing that sexual harassment at workplace is becoming more and more common. So this act needs to be in place. 2016 Child Labor Prohibition and Regulation Amendment Act. I'm sorry. An act to provide the engagement of children in all occupations and to prohibit the engagement of adolescents in hazard occupation and process. It was a landmark judgment passed by the Honorable Supreme Court, wherein a 2-judge bench of Supreme Court held that sexual intercourse with minor below 18 years wife is a rape. I'm sorry. It was read down the exemption to Section 375 of Indian Penal Code. We did not initially consider it to be rape. Can you hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead. Shalini, you could have a glass of water and then we could have you back. Yeah. Khushbu, you can take it forward. Maybe Shalini will just join.
Yes, sir. So, ma'am briefed us, Mrs. Shalini Agarwal briefed us regarding the legal provision surrounding gender-based violence. So, coming on to the last section of the seminar, we have the most important aspect of gender-based violence, that is the rehabilitation. The rehabilitation can be both psychological as well as social. So, I would request Dr. Prerna, ma'am, to comment upon the rehabilitation of survivors of violence and especially the psychological aspect of it.
And Khushbu, at this point of time, I take the privilege of asking another question. We have been mainly touching upon, workplace related violence, gender-based violence related to sexual abuse, assault, rape, etc. But there is a large chunk of unreported gender-based violence, which has increased quite a lot in these pandemic times, and that is the domestic violence, which often goes unreported in Indian households. It's not only present in the lower stratas of the society, but also very much prevalent in the higher socioeconomic stratas of the society. So I would request the esteemed panelists, especially Dr. Prerna, to tell us about the epidemiology, and also later on I would like to request Shalini when she rejoins regarding the penal provisions for that as well. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you, sir. So you rightly said that that's a big chunk which often which does not receive that much of attention as is received to the victims of sexual violence. It's often taken as something that's happening routinely in the lives. If we look up at the statistics, then the figures are very high. The NFHS survey itself reports that almost 30 to 40% of women experience one or the other type of domestic violence during their life course. But it's very important for us as health professionals to know is that yes, we are at a position where these people do present to us. Sometimes it's a active disclosure, someone coming being brought by either the police during a MLC case, or someone directly presenting for an injury that has happened. But in the major chunk, what happens that it's an accidental disclosure. Person may present to us, person may present in the orthopedic OPD for multiple pains or unexplained injuries. Person may present to gynecology OPD, or may come to psychiatry OPD itself with the relationship problems, distorted views about sexuality, sexual dysfunction, some changes in personality, or sometimes as substance use disorders. So when these people come, most of the time what happens is that just the concern of it being a medical legal case sometimes takes away the um, precedence that should be given to the psychological concerns of that lady. And more of it, the medical legal documentation, other things happen, and the immediate care is provided, but the long term care and linking her to other agencies does not happen. So what is suggested is that yes, there may be some cases where only good history will be the keen assessment, especially for domestic violence and especially for ongoing child related abuses that is happening in the domestic premises, where there may not be any concrete physical examination findings. So a clinician presenting with an enabling environment, showing a empathetic ear to listen, and encouraging the person to tell more about it, inquiring about that abuse proactively but sensitively, can help the victims or the survivors to come out with their issues. There are two approaches that people suggest. One is that whenever they are saying just encourage them, another take is also that these histories should be asked routinely. As sir said that sometimes there can be specific pointers that when there is no organic presentation to it, then they can be asked. Or sometimes it's advisable that in routine cases it's not harmful to ask them about how do they feel about their daily routine. Have they for especially for kids that do they feel that something has happened, they're feeling upset or bothered by someone else's behavior towards them, they feel that they have been touched in any other way that they do not like about. Then the next step comes is after the inquiry, handling that disclosure. Whenever a child or a lady informs about these things, we should follow 3 L's: look, listen, and link. Look is for identifying the signs. Sometimes they may not say everything, but also to look up at the gesture, the demeanor, that person wants to talk about it, and giving a probe that, okay, yes, tell me more about it, can help them open up. and acknowledging whenever they express that thing, acknowledging that it was very difficult to talk about it, regard it as a positive step, and encourage them that okay, that's nice, but never probe, never ask them to tell in detail that humiliating experience. Initially people used to say that debriefing should done, it can help person to feel better, but it should be actively discouraged. People should be just told to tell about the things wherever till the extent they are comfortable. Next is we should ask about the immediate safety concerns. Is there any threatening thing that is happening? Do they need any legal or any social support help? Then we should link them up to the next possible social support agencies, or to the legal help provisions available with the law, which are very friendly nowadays. But as health professionals, we also do not proactively inform, and people have a lot of concerns about not coming up with it. But it's also important that when we talk about the impact on the psychological health, then we have to understand that whenever there is a traumatic experience, then an individual can have a fight, flight, or a freeze response. So if it's a fight response, then person may be in a state of agitation, may be experiencing denial, may have disbelief. Or if it's a flight response, then people may be in a state where they're dissociating from the concerned state. They may present to us with unexplained unresponsiveness, dissociative stupor, or it could be a state of freeze, that they are just numb. They are not able to experience anything. During that state, it's very important for a health professional to validate that yes, whatever you are experiencing is a normal emotional response to an abnormal event, and you are safe here. If these are the immediate things that can be seen, but if they are not addressed well, then sometimes in long term they can present as depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. And also, while during the acute assessment, it's important to ask the history of self-harm. It's of thought that asking about suicide can instill the suicidality, but sometimes these concerns are not asked, and so they go unnoticed, and we experience self-harm attempts in such patients. So gently inquiring about self-harm ideation, and if such response is received, then referring them to immediately available mental health services can help.
Khushbu, I think
Thank you, ma'am.
Shalini is back. Thank you so much for that crisp description, Dr. Prerna. Shalini, we were just posing a short question to you regarding the domestic violence, which is often underreported. So what are the, very briefly, the legal provisions? As an advocate, what would you advise to our participants? Should it be reported at the first instance? Should they tolerate it? Should they discuss with family? What should be the threshold for reporting? And when should they seek legal recourse? As an advocate, would you, can you unmute yourself, please?
Okay. When we talk about domestic violence, if you talk about in India, especially 1 out of every 3 women are facing domestic violence, and this should never be tolerated. It should be reported at the very first incidents in the Women's Commission, because if you will tolerate it, this incidents will be repeated again and again, because the society is built up in such a manner. If you're going to tolerate it, the threshold is, there is no such threshold, so it should be reported in the very first incidents. And whenever the whenever the victim is coming up with such a complaint, we should maintain their confidentiality. We should be very, very careful with such victims and understand their psychology and help them accordingly. This is covered under the Domestic Violence Act of 2005, and it is undoubtedly a human rights issue and a serious deterrent to development. So this thing needs to be taken up very seriously from the beginning. इसके लिए महिला थाने भी हैं जहां लेडीज कैन गो इजीली एंड टेक हेल्प, जहां पे लेडी पुलिस होती है उनको असिस्ट करने के लिए.
Okay, so most of the women, Shalini, would be afraid that it would break their marriage, you know, put their family into disrepute or societal pressure. What would you say as a legal expert to them?
Yes, ऐसा है, but we should not do it with such a social pressure, because if you're going to be in such a social pressure, what kind of marriage it is where you have to face domestic violence? What is the benefit of such a relationship where you have to face sexual assault, domestic violence on a day-to-day basis? So a woman's whole, as a person, her own integrity is very important. Her own self-respect is very important before anything else. So we will always advise them to report it to the Mahila Thana immediately and take necessary steps so as to to National Commission for Women, so as these things are not repeated.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that will answer a lot of queries in many of our participants' minds. And
Dr. Vikram, can I just hi?
Yeah.
I just wanted to add to this very important discussion that's happening. Just
Yes, ma'am.
certain pragmatic points that come up, in relation to question what Shalini already very nicely elaborated. That as per the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, which is 2005, which also recognizes healthcare providers as one of the service providers, and in Delhi, for instance, all the district hospitals and all the government hospitals are registered medical facilities as per the Act. It's available on the Ministry of Women and Children Child Development website. Now, of course, it has to be reported, but as you rightly pointed, and that's often the ethical dilemma, that women find themselves in a situation where they cannot take immediate decision of coming out of that abuse and violence. In those instances, what becomes important to remember that the decision of reporting cannot be imposed on the survivor, and that denial to report should not lead to refuse to medical treatment. So even if the survivor is because they may take time, and as Dr. Prerna so comprehensively laid out, the process that goes into making that decision making after disclosing violence, survivors often need time to make that decision. So pragmatically, often what happens in hospitals and is that you still give her the treatment. What is very critical here is to provide a copy of the medical report, so that tomorrow, in future, when the same woman wants to go to the court, wants to report it, so that she has a record of those varied instances, because that instances of violence happened, and that it caused her, and those medical reports help her in accessing justice. So just providing care, even notwithstanding whether they want to report or not, and ensuring that these women, when they are coming, are going with a copy of the at least medical report of when they are being checked. These two things are that can be ensured in these situations.
Absolutely. That is why we say that we have to be, when we deal with such victims, we need to be really cautious. We need to be very careful. We have to maintain the confidentiality. And on top of that, we have to gain their confidence so as to they report such matters. And medically, it is very important that we keep a record of all the testing done. Within 72 hours, we need to take the testing done, but without pressure approval. We have to take the approval of the victim without any kind of pressure, because there's a lot of social pressure under which they are. So we need to make them, understand their psyche and make them comfortable, so that they go ahead with such kind of reports. And once they report, we can put a stop to such cases. If more and more victims report, then people will start getting scared of committing such crimes.
Thank you so much. I think that was very crisp, and both of you for clarifying it. I now invite Khushbu, if you allow me, I'll just invite Dr. Dinesh Jaswal, sir, former Joint Commissioner in charge of Maternal Health, Government of India, Ministry of Health. Jaswal sir had a question, and then we'll take up the question answer session. I'm sorry we are running late. So Khushbu, can we just invite Dr. Jaswal sir for his comments? Jaswal sir, can you please come in, sir?
Yeah. So, am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible, sir. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Dr. Vikram. And I am a last minute entrant into the panel discussion. Very good discussion. And let me also share with you some amount of history which I know, which has not been mentioned. Also, the latest thing which has happened. One is that the entire gender-based violence guidelines have been made by the ministry, and the genesis was the Supreme Court decision, which Dr. Manjupuri rightly said. And initially I was part of that, and the gender-based violence guidelines have been made just to streamline all the necessary testing when a patient comes to the hospital, so that there is a standardized collection of the material which is called as the safe kit, which he mentioned, right? Now the other is that after the Nirbhaya case, there was establishment of one stop crisis center in all the district hospital. Now I am not aware of the number, but they are in substantial number at the moment. Now, these one-stop crisis center actually, does everything. There's, there is it has been laid down that there has to be a corner where, all privacy needs to be there and all those things. So that is one. The latest is that the ministry has established and not WCD ministry has established a high powered committee which is looking at the increasing the age of the females, right? So that's the latest which has happened. So basically they are going into this, that increasing the age, and also the since the age of the woman for marrying is 18 years, so they want to increase the age. So that's that is under consideration, serious consideration for with the government. So this was all which I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And I would like to mention here to the August gathering that Dr. Baswal had been instrumental in advocating for respectful maternal care across the country as a part of the Lakshya National Flagship Program. And I think respect at all levels, starting from the maternity period per se, is also one of the elements which is very prime or center stage to the component of gender-based violence. And I would congratulate sir for all the initiatives which he has been taking in the ministry. Thank you so much, sir. Please stay on for the question and answer session. So Khushbu, any further comments before we lead to the question and answers?
Thank you, sir. I would like to thank all the panelists for describing in detail how to approach a case of gender-based violence, starting from the prevalence and how to approach the rehabilitative process. So I would like, since we are running short of time, we can we can have the question and answer session.
Okay. So we will very quickly take a couple of questions. We have one question from Professor Surekha Taide. Professor Surekha Taide is head of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at Wardha. And ma'am wants to ask this question. I think this will be related to Dr. Prerna. Gender-based violence in lockdown was not only predictable, but also preventable, ma'am says. It's labeled shadow pandemic, how it was starting almost in the face immediately after the lockdown with a sharp rise in distress calls in the first week itself. What could have been done better in this distress situation? Dr. Prerna?
Right. Sir, very truly pointed out by ma'am that possibly it could have been prevented, but ministry from MOHFW and NCW, they did took up the initiatives to, and DSLSA also took up the initiatives that they opened up the hotlines where the women can freely lodge in their complaints. And the access was also kept at the dairy booths and the grocery stores, so that even if the women is going out to buy some essential item, they can approach the concerned person. In Western countries like in France and Greece, they had done up some creative things that lady need not say that I am I'm suffering from domestic violence or anything else is happening. She can use a code word like COVID-19 mask when she goes to the chemist shop, and that was used as a press button to inform and link her to a social support and legal agency. So government did put up certain measures, but by being more creative, yes, things can happen better. In Odisha also, they have taken up that initiative of breaking the silence. Maharashtra government is also working on it. So certain state governments are coming up with their own creative ideas.
Thank you so much, Dr. Prerna. So before we end, I think we will just have a one-line take-home message from each of the panelists. And I start with first, I would start with Ms. Atsa. Ms. Atsa, your one-line take-home message for our participants today.
I just want to say that break the silence, and we must speak out against gender-based violence, and for recognizing gender-based violence as a public health issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Dr. Manju Puri, ma'am.
So ma'am had to leave the seminar due to certain urgent issues.
So Professor Harish Pemde.
I think the biggest learning from the seminar is, as a doctor, we have to have a high index of suspicion that any patient, any child, any adult who is coming in our contact may be having some kind of violence. So just keep a high index of suspicion, and whenever you have a doubt, it is always good to rule it out whether this is happening or not happening. And this can be done with after learning few tricks and tips. That is very, very simple things, but we all can do it. And another thing is, whenever you yourself is suffering, then whom to tell? Then you have to find the ways to tell the people who can take care of you, as well as the various agencies which are being listed now. And Vikram, because some of the students will be there in this panel as an audience, Dr. Guttu has come out with a very, very new circular from the medical college side. And he has planned to make some self-help groups of the students, kind of a peer educator groups. And they have also created CWC, kind of a counseling and wellness center in our adolescent clinic itself. So we have been telling earlier also, any student has any problem which they want to share, they want to talk about, any stress, anything, any issues, they are most welcome to our clinic. It has been renamed as a counseling and wellness clinic, and we shall definitely help each and every student there.
So those were 12 lines, Harish, but I think I give you that latitude because all the messages were very apt. Thank you so much for summarizing them. I come next to Shalini Agarwal. Yes, ma'am. Your take-home message. You are mute, ma'am. Yeah, that's fine.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, fine.
Okay. I would say we should have 0% tolerance to any kind of violence against us. Be vocal. Don't think about the society. Think about your own safety, your own protection first. Because if we be vocal, then only we can reduce such kind of violence. There are sufficient laws to protect you, to take care of you, to secure you. Just be vocal about it.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think that will build up the morale of most of the colleagues sitting here and the participants. And being vocal, I think, is something which is part of the UN declaration also. Dr. Prerna, please.
So
my message, ma'am.
My one-liner is look, listen, and link. Look with high index of suspicion and with respect. Listen non-judgmentally and with empathy, and link them to appropriate service.
Okay, so thank you so much. I think that's very aptly put. Khushbu, I give you a chance. You've been beautifully coordinating this, and you deserve a lot of applause and congratulations from the entire house and all the participants from the families, etc. You also adopted 2 small puppies. We know about them, including one of them who's injured, and you're taking care of patients. You deserve a lot of, applause from this group for your compassion. So what's your take-home message for all young medical and nursing students, and also students of your age about gender-based violence?
Thank you, sir. So we as interns and we as medical undergraduates, we're on the path of becoming healthcare professionals in the future. And it is very important for us to understand the gravity of the situation and that we should not take a back seat when we come across a situation of violence, even if it is at our home or we are as a bystander, because we have this responsibility in our hands. And it is often the choice of challenge that it is present there. Pragmatically speaking, there are a lot of challenges in seeking support to end violence at home, and especially domestic violence, since it's integrated into the integrated as a part of a family and the relation. So it is very important for us to understand that a harm to our own self-respect should not go very long. And though challenges are there present to acquire help from the legal system, we should still motivate our family members as well as anybody who is a victim of violence to seek support and help and provide them a respectable care at the end of the day.
Thank you so much. Baswal sir, your take home message, sir.
So, my take home, message to all people is that gender-based violence actually has a wide ramification, let me tell you. And it has to be actually, dealt in the proper way. We have all the system in place, but I think one of the things which people have to do is that we need to actually take it to the communities where you develop, the women's group, which needs to be encouraged, and they need to, work on these areas, because this is a huge ramification in terms of, pandemics, which has been proved. So, this illegal wildlife trade is one of the example for pandemic. So I think we need to work in the communities, develop these, women's groups who need to be empowered, so that, the resources which are being exploited, they need to be, taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I think that was one aspect which we had missed touching, and very essential, sir, the empowerment of the community. An empowered community, like we always say, demands quality.
Yeah.
We could also rephrase it as an empowered community will also demand an immediate end to gender-based violence.
Yeah.
And that is something I think women empowerment would mean. An empowered community starts with an empowered woman at home. And I think Professor Garg from Sebagram Medical College very aptly puts it always whenever we are talking about community empowerment. So that brings me to the last parts of today's session. We have the Vice President of the Nationwide Quality of Care Network, Dr. Suprabha Patnaik. Suprabha, your concluding remarks and word of thanks, please.
Right. Thank you very
Can
much.
you put on your video, please, Suprabha?
Net, I'll just switch
Okay.
on, but net might be in internet.
Okay, that should be fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Khushbu and your team, for conducting the webinar such beautifully. And I'm very sure that all of us have benefited, because this is an important aspect which all of us have to actually be very mindful of, and we need to spread the awareness among ourselves and among the community as well. With this, I take this opportunity on behalf of NQSN to thank our young Be the Change group for conducting this webinar so beautifully. And I also extend my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Vinesh Baswal sir for joining us, and to all our panelists, Dr. Harish Pende sir, Dr. Prerna, Dr. Manju, Dr. Miss Shalini Agarwal, and Miss Adsa from Sama. And of course, and all this success has been there because of our NQSN office members, Dr. Dhingra, Dr. Rahul, Dr. Salman. And this webinar would not have been successful without the presence of our dear participants. I hope they have enjoyed the webinar as much as all of us have done. With this, I thank each and everyone over here. Thank you very much on behalf of NQSN.
Thank you, Suprabha. I wish everybody a safe time ahead. Thank you so much for participating in this, and hearty congratulations to the Be the Change young professional group. And we look forward to many more such activities where we involve the community and raise awareness about social issues on which we all need to advocate. Thank you, esteemed panelists. Thank you, all of you. And good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Everyone, take care. Bye.